Welcome, everyone, to Episode 5 of the Batman vs. James Bond show. I am your host, Brian Thomas. Thanks for joining me. This is the show where we discuss everything related to Batman and James Bond movies, news, trailers, scores, reviews, matchups, and more. First off, I would like to thank everyone who has tuned in since Episode 1, and for all you new listeners out there, welcome. Grab a martini, or if you're like Bruce Wayne and you don't drink at all, that's fine, that's cool. Apparently, actually, I just read up about this, that, Bruce Wayne, it was funny, he really does not drink at all in the comics. He actually drinks ginger ale, acting like he's drinking champagne or whatever else, so you can grab a little ginger ale, sit back and relax and enjoy the show, because we have a lot to cover this week, as always. Before we get started, just a few things I would like to mention. Please, number one, subscribe to the Batman vs. James Bond show on iTunes and leave a nice little review for me on there. Also, number two, believe it or not, it has actually been a week since Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has been released. I had to do it in the Batman voice. I don't know why, it just comes out of me sometimes. It's like the Christian Bale Batman. It's like, where were the drugs going? Where were they going? I can't help it sometimes. It's just going to happen once in a while on the show. I might just break character. That, just a warning. Anyway, it's been an interesting week this week, to say the least. It feels like the critics have gone underground in their little bomb shelters and hiding, and they're ready to wave the white flag. Fans have been rioting all over the place, and even more news has come out about Batman v Superman. Yes, James Bond fans, I know we spent a whole episode last week of nothing but Batman v Superman. And I know you're probably tired of hearing about Batman v Superman, as is, everybody who's not a fan of Batman. I understand. Don't worry. I got you covered. Like I said last week, back to some more James Bond news this week. I'm going to do a little mixing it up, if you will, because there's some good topics out there that I found that I think both fans will enjoy. So without further ado, let's hop into some news. All right, so kicking it off here, before we actually get into news, I know I said let's hop into news. Well, this is news, if you will, because, I said before last week, I still am going to have more thoughts on Batman versus Superman, and believe me, I do. So I've been giving it some more thought, and I really tried to see this movie again. I honestly, I did. Unfortunately, how do I say this? Work kept me very busy. I'm not using that as an excuse that I gave my homework, but it's really true. I was in training all week. Number two, the wife didn't want to see it again. Now, for those of you that are married, whether, you have a husband or a wife who's not a Batman fan, well, I'm not saying that she's not a Batman fan. She's actually a Ben Affleck fan, and she's a fan of Henry Cavill. Two strong guys that are, going head to head in a movie. Of course, she's going to want to go see that. I wanted to see it for other reasons. However, for those of you that are married, and you don't want to drag, the wife or the husband, they don't want to go see this movie all over again. Well, I can, maybe you'll know where I'm coming from. So, I really didn't have a chance to see the movie. I don't even know if I don't want to say I don't want to see it again, but I don't have that rush to go see it like I did with, say, Spectre or The Dark Knight or even The Dark Knight Rises. And I'm not going to go do a whole nother review of the movie again. I just wanted to give some more thoughts because I've had time to think about this. Listen to other shows, read some other articles online. It goes without saying, my rating's still going to stick at a strong 3.5 out of 5. Liked it, didn't love it. The biggest question with this movie has been, is this movie going to hold up? Will the fans and the viewers not let the critics influence them? Now, before I even get into that, I know I keep saying before, but I kind of have to. So, but doing some more thinking about this movie, and just, if it wasn't for that story that just kind of, that flow of the story, or just, like I said, it was like Christmas Day, you go down, I know I keep using the analogies here, but it kind of feels that way. Christmas Eve, you're ready, you're hoping you're going to get that gift that's gift wrapped perfectly by your parents or, the family, and you go downstairs and you open it, and it, what it ends up being? It's just not exactly what you had wanted. I know that sounds spoiled. I know it sounds selfish, and actually I am an only child, so that, that pretty much sums me up in a nutshell. At the same time, though, was even like commenting on other bloggers and if you want to say fans out there, and they did agree with me. I'm not saying that that's great that they agree with me. If you didn't agree with me, that's fine too. I always say that. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and that's what makes us fans. At the same time, though, I still had built up in my mind what I wanted this new movie to be. And like I said, it wasn't quite the movie we wanted, but it's the movie we got. See what I did with the Batman analogy there? In this case, it was a Dark Knight analogy. So, I'll keep going back to this. I still think if that story had been more grounded, if you will, more straightforward, instead of trying to do the whole, let's work in the Justice League. And then you have Zack Snyder. I'm listening to interviews with him about how, he came up with the idea for the Batman v Superman. He created the logo. We've talked about that before. How he pitched this idea to Warner Brothers. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to do a Batman movie, and well, I'm going to throw the spoiler alert out right now, okay? So, if you guys haven't, for any of you that haven't seen it, which I imagine there aren't any, then, spoiler alert real quick. Just time out, fast forward 15 seconds, whatever. We all know at the end of Batman v Superman that Superman dies. We've talked about that before. But it was interesting how he pitched, when I say he, Zack Snyder pitched this idea. First of all, he talked to Christopher Nolan about this, and he said, hey, I think I'm going to kill Superman at the end because it kind of makes him have that sacrifice, what it means to be human. And we've kind of seen that in a Batman movie. We actually did see that in a Batman movie. We saw that at the end of The Dark Knight Rises. We see Batman just flying off there in the Bat, and he's carrying the nuke out there, and all of a sudden it explodes, and what do? They realize Batman was the hero. Batman was the hero that we needed, maybe not the one we wanted, but the hero that we needed at the time. At the same time, they gave him a statue, they buried him, and, no one knew who the Batman was, and that wasn't so important. It's what Batman stood for. In this case, it's very similar, the more I think about it, that Superman, or Batman v Superman, had that kind of an ending, and I think that's where Snyder was trying to do it. You have the general public, and they're going against Superman, or a majority of them, think Superman's an alien, he's here to cause chaos, and we don't know what he stands for. What does Superman do? He's like, okay, well, this is my world. And he takes the I guess it's the, I don't know what it was. It had kryptonite at the end of it. It's like the pole that had kryptonite on it. You know what it's called. And my mind's drawing a blank as always. He just shoves that in. He flies that into Doomsday. Doomsday goes through his chest and kills him. So we think. That's how it kind of left off, but we know that the sand kind of moved, or the dirt kind of moved in his coffin. What I'm getting at, though, is that if the more you think about it, that Superman, it was doing the same thing that Batman was doing in The Dark Knight Rises. He's sacrificing his life to save, the human species. And, by doing this, everybody realizes what Superman stood for. I mean, of course, we know, the S stands for hope. But at the same time, Superman was the hero that maybe we didn't want, but maybe we needed. Especially with, new alien species being created by Lex Luthor. So, when Zack Snyder pitched this idea to Christopher Nolan, Nolan was more of the one saying, well, I don't know if you should do that. It might not be the best idea to kill Superman. And at the same time, probably all the fans are like, well, it's Superman. I mean, we've only technically had him for just one movie, and all of a sudden you're going to just kill him? And, he was playing devil's advocate, but, Snyder apparently kind of showed Nolan why he thought it was a good idea, and Nolan kind of was like, okay, you make a good point. You should do it. And remind you that Christopher Nolan is an executive producer. He is kind of a consultant on this. I mean, if he's going to put his name on there, I don't think he's just going to sit there and just get a paycheck. Nolan's too creative to do that, in my mind. But you can tell that this wasn't his story, but ideas were borrowed from him. Now, when the story was pitched to Warner Brothers, what made this interesting was that, Snyder was saying, oh, we're going to kill Superman. And the studio's like, no, you can't kill Superman. You can't kill him at all. And Snyder was saying, hey, if I do it this way, I can put an interesting spin on it. I can, introduce the Justice League at the very end. And what I want to do is make it so Batman, Bruce Wayne, is the one who forms the Justice League. Just because, it gives Batman that more kind of a power to get everybody together, whereas it would be easy to get Superman on there. He wanted Bruce Wayne to be the leader, if you will. So, and then when Snyder pitched this idea, in addition to Warner Brothers, he was saying, and you know what? I'm going to throw in Dawn of Justice at the end of it. And then, of course, you know, you could imagine Warner Brothers was probably like, oh yes, we need to get our Justice League. We need to get it going ASAP because over there at that other studio, they're making a mint and they're just, they have the intertwined universe of all kinds of movies and we should be doing that. We already know what my thoughts are on that. And I'll say it one more time. You know, while the other guys, and I say, you know who the other guys are, I'm not going to pretend to say it, the MCU, and I'm not against them. I'm just saying that that idea of a shared universe does not work for everybody. Okay. That's, to me, let me go with this. The idea of a shared universe is like one big TV series. It's an extended TV series for movies. Okay. Go back to like the old Batman movies, okay? Go back to when they were kind of like more separate films, okay? It was all about just Batman. Same with James Bond, if you want to go with this. For you Bond fans out there that are also fans of Batman. James Bond has never had to have a shared universe. Sure, they've talked about having like secondary characters as like, we'll create something because Halle Berry's such an A-lister. We're going to create her own character that's like James Bond. Well, I hate to say it, but it's not going to work for everybody, okay? Sometimes films that are separate work the best. If it wasn't planned to be a sequel, it ends up working out even better because, okay, well, you focused on that one specific movie. You put everything that you had into that movie and you made it awesome. Fans, you will understand when I say this about just even the original Batman 1989. I know I always go back to this, but this is still one of the definitive Batman movies out there. Batman Returns. I just watched that on Friday night, actually. And the interesting thing about that movie, and I was reading up about this, is that the only reason Tim Burton came back on that was because he didn't want to make an actual sequel to the film, but he just felt that his original Batman 1989 wasn't as good as it could be. He actually likes Batman Returns even better, but he tried to make it more of a standalone sequel. Sure, he mentioned a few things in there with the previous Batman movie, but even when I go back and watch that now, and it's been a while, I could see that as a standalone movie. He wasn't worried about setting up, for, what's upcoming next. Oh, we're going to set up for Two-Face and we're going to set up for the Riddler. We're going to set up for Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy. He wasn't worried about that. Same with, you could kind of say that about The Dark Knight. He wasn't worried, and I say he, Christopher Nolan. Nolan wasn't worried about that at all. He's just like, okay, well, I'm going to focus right now on the characters that I have. If it ends up being, I like leaving people on a cliffhanger ending, and that's exactly what he did even in Batman Begins. I'm going to show you a Joker card, but that's about as far as I'm going to go for worrying about the next movie. James Bond films, what do you have when you look at Skyfall? Skyfall, for example, a standalone Bond movie, and look how well that worked out. Sam Mendes, the director, was not worried about setting up for the next movie. He had elements in there. Maybe he's thought, okay, well, I set up stuff for the next person to come by, but at the same time, this would be a perfect standalone film if it was just that. I had, a great villain. I had James Bond doing what James Bond does best, but I had an interesting story at the same time. But then that was it. Casino Royale, you go back and look at that film. That was a reintroduction to James Bond in a way we've never seen it before, too. But they set it up for, they could have taken that any direction, but they weren't worried so much about a sequel. They'll be like, okay, we'll leave it at this kind of an ending, and then we'll go with that. Going back here to Batman v Superman, it was all about it's all about the shared universe, and that's what bugs me. It's like, okay, well, this is your setup film for what's to come, and it didn't need to be that way. If they would have just gotten rid of Dawn of Justice, it would have, if you just had Batman v Superman, you would have never showed Wonder Woman in those trailers, not even Doomsday. If you want to have Lex Luthor in there, that's fine, but I would have changed it so many different ways. But like I said, I'm not a writer, I'm not a director, and obviously they know they know better than we do. Maybe they don't. I don't know. Maybe it's all about the money at the end of the day. Same time, though, they could have gone way different ways about this story. So, I'll leave it at that for now, at least with my thoughts. I'm sure I'll have more to come with this. I did want to talk about the box office with this, and, sometimes, we'll talk about this, especially when a new movie comes out. It'll be at least another year or two before the next Batman movie comes out. Or will it? We'll see. I did want to talk about the Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice a little bit more with the box office, just because this is where I say it was an interesting week. So when you're talking about a movie like this, I mean, it didn't have any competition. It ended up being number one, just as we expected it to be. I think it ended up getting like about at least between 165 and 170, if memory serves me correctly, for their opening weekend. That's a great box office. I mean, the numbers speak for itself. Now, here's where it got interesting, was the decline. This decline for this movie was just, it was wow. I mean, like, it was about an 81% drop from its second Friday. It had a 68% drop overall in its second weekend, which is the biggest second weekend drop off ever for a film that stars either Batman or Superman in history. So what does this mean? Okay, well, minus what I just read from the Hollywood Reporter, it's saying that sure, the anticipation was out there for all the fans, but because if you look at the movie this way, and this can go for any film, the critics do have an influence, whether we like them or not. Okay, sometimes we're going to like them, sometimes we're not. We're going to have a love-hate relationship. At least I do, and I think all of us fall into that category. With this movie, just say that the critics gave it a 80%, okay? And, if you're like me, we've talked about this, Rotten Tomatoes, we go on there, or we go on, if we go onto whatever movie site, Collider, Screen Rant, trying to think, was it Cosmic Book News, all different, whatever. If we see a rating on there, and majority of the ratings by at least these movie blogs or, critics are going to be positive, that's going to be great for the movie. When you have something like this, when you have critics' reviews and movie websites that are giving it mediocre to less than mediocre reviews, it's not going to be good for the movie, no matter how much the fans like it. I mean, you look at a movie like, say, even Judge Dredd, and sure, it had positive reviews. The fans liked it, but sometimes it's just, it all depends on who else is going to go out there and want to see this, because maybe they had repeat viewers from fans like us, but at the same time, people are, if they hear the negative reviews, it's going to have a bad stench, and that stench is going to continue. So unfortunately, I don't know what this means for Warner Brothers. I mean, let's face it, April is here. Happy April, by the way. At the same time, this movie, or Justice League, is about ready to film in the next couple weeks. Zack Snyder's directing this movie. A lot of people have negative reviews, or just, they have their negative opinions about Zack Snyder. We're all in agreement visually that he can do a movie. Is he a good storyteller? That remains to be the question. I think he did great with Man of Steel, but Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer wrote that story. This one, it was David S. Goyer who originally wrote the screenplay. Chris Terrio wrote the parts of Batman for Ben Affleck, which you can obviously tell. And who knows who else was writing in on this movie? I mean, Snyder probably had his, influence on it too. Probably the way he wanted to show it. He had a picture in his mind. He wanted to make more comic book Dark Knight Returns, and he kind of did that. But at the same time, he jumped too much. So I guess where I was going with this is that, with this box office, Warner Brothers might want to do some thinking about how they want to pace themselves with these movies. And what maybe the direction that they should have went. Maybe just, like I was saying at the beginning of the show, just do the separate movies, worry about the separate movies, and then if it ends up becoming something, if they end up working out, then that's great. Then you can start doing your Justice League. They try to do something different, and it doesn't look like it's working out the way they wanted to. I mean, kudos to them for trying something different than, what the other guys have done. We've seen it in Amazing Spider-Man 2. They tried to set up something there. It didn't work out. Fantastic Four. Well, if you're a Fantastic Four fan, then you know what happened with that. Or not even a fan. You just know in movies that it was a huge flop and a huge mess. Some people were comparing that to this. I don't know if I would call it that. I mean, the money is there. They're making their money back. But yeah, this is going to be something interesting for, at least when it comes, like I said, to critics and to, movie viewers. Do we listen to the critics? We don't have to listen to the critics, but at the same time, their opinion does matter, and it will influence average Joe about who goes out and sees those movies, especially the movies that we love, because we can keep going in repeat views, but if you're not attracting other audiences, just like, say, a Star Wars or Jurassic World out there, then guess what? Then, maybe it's not going to work out in our favor every time. Just a thought. And, I guess while I'm on that subject, of like, say, the Star Wars and Jurassic World, yes, this is still a Batman versus James Bond show, but I still would like to intertwine some things in here occasionally because, of how franchises work. Because let's face it, these are two of the biggest long running franchises ever. I mean, you have Batman at 75 plus years. You have James Bond going on, I believe it's 54, almost. It's coming up on 54 years. There was this article I was reading the other night, and it was talking about how, we're all familiar, at least especially in the Batman James Bond world, about remakes, reboots, prequels, threequels, whatever, trilogies, all that kind of stuff. What they were saying in this, and this is also from the Hollywood Reporter, is that the latest Hollywood obsession is something called the requel. Now, this one was new to me, and I found it really interesting, but at the same time, it's like, okay, this kind of makes sense because this has been going on, especially in these two franchises. So a requel, as they quoted, is a movie that's both a reboot and a sequel, blending old within an effort to extend the life of a franchise, in the best cases, reinvent it for a universe of follow-up movies. Now, immediately when I read that, I was like, okay, well, they're clearly talking about Batman, which the article was titled Batman v Superman following the requel, or at least it had it on there about, Batman v Superman being a requel. And where they were going with that was that, when you have Batman v Superman, first of all, you had Man of Steel, so DC tried to do a sequel to that, but they didn't want to make it just strictly a Superman movie. They wanted to bring in Batman in there. So what are they going to do? So they're doing a sequel to Superman. At the same time, they pitched the idea of rebooting the Batman and the Dark Knight, and they're going to combine both of them. So there you go. There's your requel. So you're firing something back up that you had, even though it's only been, give or take, 3 years since we've had Batman on the screen. No, wait a minute. 4 years. I'm sorry. 4 years since Batman was on the screen. And then you're going to just kind of reinvent it, but, it's still going to be kind of a follow-up movie. So in the case of, Batman and James Bond, I guess you could say, it was more of like, okay, well, going back with Batman, we'll just start with that since that is the main topic right now. The idea of a requel, reboots, and reimagining, whatever you want to call it, and, it's ever changing. It's always going to happen. I mean, we think about how many different Batmans we've had. Okay, I'll start with the Adam West Batman, which I need to really go back and watch. You had a retelling of Batman, which was darker, with Batman 1989 or Tim Burton's Batman and Batman Returns. It got too dark for some people, or at least for the studio at that time. So what do? You kind of reboot it, but with a sillier, kind of lighter tone, if you will. And as light as you can make Batman, about a vigilante who, still fights crime and dressed like a bat. So that's the Joel Schumacher. And then you decide to go as and I'm so tired of this, but it's still being used. It's darker and grittier. So they decide to go darker and grittier with the Christopher Nolan. So they reboot the whole franchise and, let's ignore what happened in the past and we'll just create our own separate Batman. And now what's happening? It's happening all over again. You're rebooting, you're recreating Batman, a character that we all know and love. Well, at least, everybody who's listening to this show. You're rebooting a character, but you're telling a different story about that. At the same time, you're putting him in, in a way we've never seen him. That's all. I mean, that's, I think, how it's always going to be with these movies. And sure, right now, Ben Affleck is our Batman as it stands. Who knows in 10 years what this Batman or what Batman's going to be? I would like to know from you guys, what direction would you like to see Batman go next? I mean, you could say this Batman right now is obviously based on a Frank Miller Batman or Dark Knight Returns. He's older. He's more not so much about following the rules. He's just kind of lost it. He's lost his mind. He's just his partner died, and the way he fights crime isn't quite as clean as it used to be, if you will. And I'm trying to not go spoiler, but we've kind of already. So yeah, he's the Batman who doesn't kill. I heard a story at one time about it's the guy Darren Aronofsky, and if you don't know the name, he's the guy who directed Black Swan and The Wrestler. And he was actually about to do a telling of Batman, but what made this Batman really interesting was that He wanted to take Batman and just put him on the street, more like a way of a Punisher. No Batcave, no Alfred, nothing like that. He was just kind of on the street, and he had that psychology, or he was trying to get in the psychology or the mental idea or state of mind of what the criminals were like. That way he could start fighting criminals even, or he had the upper hand on criminals. I don't know. Maybe that's a telling that they can eventually do. I mean, I think we can all agree that there's all different versions of Batman out there, but we don't want to see a Batman like the Joel Schumacher version. And I know I always crap on that. And, like I said, if you're a fan of that, that's great. At the same time, though, I think it speaks for itself. Nobody wants to see the days of the campy, funny, ha ha ha, cheesy superhero movie are gone. Now it's either, you have to have a superhero movie that has some laughs, but still has that, a bigger budget action. Or you have to have like the dark, non-funny tone. And, who knows what's going to be, sooner or later. I would, even let me go back to this with the James Bond movies. Okay. So we've seen James Bond go through, let's see, starting with Sean Connery, we had at least 5 films from him. And then, well, in between that, though, you had George Lazenby, which more was a darker tone. Then you come back with Sean Connery and Roger Moore, and it was a lighter tone. Then they go to Timothy Dalton, which I would say was more of a darker tone, but people were not ready for that. Pierce Brosnan was a good in-between of Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton. He started off darker, then it just lightened up and got too cheesy at the very end. Daniel Craig, this is at the same time of the Nolan trilogy, because you'll find, if you haven't noticed already, that a lot of movies, especially when it comes to James Bond, sometimes get influenced. We've seen that with like the likes of a Jason Bourne. We've seen that with Batman. The Dark Knight trilogy heavily influenced Skyfall and Spectre, if you couldn't tell. And Sam Mendes has gone on record saying that, he loved how, Nolan was able to do a Batman story like that, more grounded and, more about a story and more about the characters. And that's great. So my question to you guys would be also, what, for the Bond fans out there, what direction, and we always say, my bet is right now that Daniel Craig's not going to come back. Ben Whishaw, who played Q in the last 2 movies, is saying that, he thinks that Daniel Craig is coming back. It's all hearsay right now. But let's just say, that Daniel Craig is not coming back. What direction would you want to see James Bond go in? I mean, do you go back to the lighter campier of, say, Roger Moore, try something different? Do you stick with that darker, grittier? Or do you just say, hey, we'll just do a new reboot of James Bond. We'll kind of do this requel thing. I don't know if the requel would really work in the James Bond franchise. Just because James Bond is obviously a standalone character, he's not going to be fighting, Ethan Hunt for Mission Impossible. He's probably never going to fight Jason Bourne, despite what some people would like to see out there. I think it would be an interesting battle to see Matt Damon versus Daniel Craig, though. I think my bet would be on Daniel Craig just because I'm a bigger Bond fan. But still, that would be a great fight. Going back, though, to the Batman franchise, though, real quick, though. So it was released this week that Ben Affleck has completed a script for a Batman movie, or a standalone Batman movie. We kind of knew that was coming already. This has already been, it's like you have a perfect scenario. You have one of the hottest directors right now, and not speaking physically looks about him. Yes, he is very attractive ladies. He's, I would say Henry Cavill or Daniel Craig would be more on my list, but you didn't hear that from me. Going back with that, though, is that, Ben Affleck has a script. It's been confirmed. The question is, when is this standalone Batman movie going to be? What's it going to be about? The thing is, nobody knows what it's going to be about. If I had to guess, and where I would hope, at least as a Batman fan, is that this would be either, more of what happened before the events of Superman, Batman v Superman, before Superman came to town. What drove this Batman to be so dark? How did Robin die? All of that. I'd like to see, and I don't want an origin story again, but I just want to see, okay, go back in, at least in history, to show him as Batman, and what drove him to be where he is in that deep, dark place right now to just hang up the cowl all of a sudden. That's the kind of Batman movie I want to see. So, another thing I did want to touch on real quick, finish up with the news, is that for you Star Wars fans out there, and yes, this is still a Batman versus James Bond show. I will keep saying that, but I like to kind of weave in other movie franchises in here because, it's easy to say, like I said, James Bond is influenced by Batman. Sometimes Batman's influenced by James Bond, vice versa. Sometimes, though, the characters from these movies will end up and share a cameo. So when I say that, I'm saying that if you didn't know, Daniel Craig, when he was shooting Spectre at Pinewood Studios, was there also with J.J. Abrams, who was shooting Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Daniel Craig, if I'm sure everybody knows this by now, was a stormtrooper and had an awesome cameo. Even though you didn't know it was him, and it took me a minute until I heard the story to be like, wow, that was Daniel Craig. And guess what? James Bond was a stormtrooper. I'd be like, that is so badass. So it's like, oh my God, it's cool to be a Star Wars film because now James Bond is kind of in the Star Wars, franchise in a way. And I thought it was interesting, but what I was going with that is that, Daniel Craig had a small part in Star Wars: The Force Awakens. It's like not even a 5-minute cameo, but even though you never even see his face, but Star Wars: Force Awakens comes out, and to me, it's worth it just to buy that movie and keep rewatching that little part because it's probably one of the best parts in the movie. Yes, I'm being biased, but whatever. So, anywho, let's move on to some other stuff. Let's talk some March Madness James Bond versus Batman brackets. All right, so when we last left off, and this was a couple episodes ago, I created this matchup, this bracket, like for you March Madness fans out there. It's okay if you're not a basketball fan, no problem, because this is all about Batman versus James Bond. Now, when we last left off, it was the first round of the single elimination, and we had all the contenders on the Batman side, from as many of the Batman characters as we could fit in there. No, I did not include Robin. No, I did not include Commissioner Gordon or Alfred in there. Sorry. On the James Bond side, I had to be very picky about what villains I did put in there and which James Bonds and Blofelds and so forth. So, just if you didn't get a chance to listen to that, you can go back up and catch up on that where we left off. But right now, we are on the second round. So what we have right now is we're looking at the Batman side. This is the left-hand side of the bracket. And I will post this bracket once again on Facebook and Twitter just so you guys can keep up and let me know what you think about it, who you think should win versus each matchup, and why you probably think I'm completely wrong and I have no life. That's okay. So starting it off here with the second round of the bracket, it's going to be Michael Keaton's Batman versus Catwoman Michelle Pfeiffer. Now, I just went back and watched Batman Returns, and let me just say that is going to be a good matchup. That's going to go either way. I honestly think that it's probably going to be Batman Michael Keaton just because, he still is Batman. Catwoman is still kind of coming into her own. Sure, she's got the fighting skill. Sure, she's got the claws that, can go through the, weak spot of his, leather batsuit, but in even the whip, it's just not enough. Batman has more gadgets, and, he doesn't even need the gadgets to be Catwoman. It's just that he's got that, experience. He's got the intelligence to outsmart her. I mean, he was able to push her off a building at least once. And, I think Michael Keaton, but I'm playing favorites here, but oh well. So the next matchup is going to be in the second round is going to be Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face versus Poison Ivy Uma Thurman. Yeah, I'm going to have to go here Tommy Lee Jones Two-Face. Reason for that is that Poison Ivy, she's too worried about just herself. She really is. It's just like Mother Nature, we need to save her. She's deteriorating. I'm making her sound like a little British person, and sorry to offend anybody there. But, at the same time, that's kind of how Uma Thurman talks. Go back and watch Batman and Robin. You'll see what I mean there. So, the reason I say that is, and this is once again comes to physically and just, not because he's a guy, but it's just that Tommy Lee Jones was more of what he had to work with. He was just the better villain, and he was more violent. And, Poison Ivy, sure, she's can, try to seduce somebody. I don't think it's going to work on Two-Face. I think he's cold-hearted, and he really doesn't give a damn. Okay, moving on here, though. So next is Batman George Clooney versus Batman Christian Bale. Whew, I wonder who we're going to pick here.
Oh, you're going to pick me because I know where the drugs were going. George Clooney was never Batman.
Yeah, I broke it out. Why not? I'll break it out every once in a while. I can do a Batman voice. At least I like to think I can. I can even do a Sean Connery, but I'll save that for when we get to the James Bond side here. Just remind me. Yeah, Batman Christian Bale was way stronger, and yeah, he actually trained up in the mountains, and he was training with the League of Assassins, and yeah, I think that easily. I mean, you didn't see George Clooney doing any push-ups or anything like that in Batman and Robin. He was too busy just trying to, or he was too busy getting seduced by Poison Ivy. So, yeah, it's going to be easily Batman Christian Bale. So, moving on here. I said that was a good fight before, but I wanted the Joker, Heath Ledger, to advance in this because he is one of the iconic villains, not just in the Batman franchise, but ever. So when it comes to this one, it's going to be Heath Ledger's The Joker versus Catwoman's Anne Hathaway, or Catwoman played by Anne Hathaway. Excuse me. Yeah, it's going to be Joker winning this round again. Anne Hathaway, she's a thief. She's not a terrorist. Yeah, you get rid of the Bat Pod. Yeah, she used that to get rid of Bane, who was probably one of the stronger, out of the two. At the same time, Joker's always going to be a step ahead. The Joker is the Joker for a reason, and, if he's not plotting like something with a hospital, they're blowing that up, he's gonna, put her on a ferry. He's gonna put her in an abandoned building and, maybe tie her up. I think Anne Hathaway she might have the street smarts, but she's not as clever and as smart as he could be. So sorry, it's gonna go to Heath Ledger Joker. Next one, I want this. I wanted it to be Bane, but at the same time, though, Bane ended up being just the secondary henchman, so it's got to be Batman Ben Affleck who won that. Who is Batman going to go against? Naturally, it's going to be Superman Henry Cavill. So Henry Cavill ended up being out Lex Luthor, like I said he was going to, so now you really do have a Batman versus Superman. What makes this interesting is that this is set in my universe, and in this universe, all it is just Batman versus Superman, all out. You want to throw in the Batman armor suit, awesome. If you want to throw in Henry Cavill with the light, or the lasers coming out of his eyes, awesome. Or the heat vision, sorry, you nerds. Yeah, this is a straight-up brawl. I don't know who's going to win. I mean, you'd have to have Ben Affleck having the kryptonite like he did in the movie. As long as he has the kryptonite, then he does stand a chance. And that it does answer the question of who would win. But I'm going to let you guys think about that and get back to me on that. The final one's going to be Wonder Woman because she obviously did beat Doomsday. So she's going to be waiting for the champion of the Batman, Ben Affleck versus Superman Henry Cavill. So moving on for you James Bond fans to the right side of the bracket. So we had Sean Connery. Sean Connery, you cannot let Sean Connery not win in a bracket because, my dear boy, he always wins. See, I can do a little bit of Sean Connery, but I'm just going to slip in every now and then because I don't want it to, I don't want to overdo it. Anyway, I just want it to be a little hidden treat for you guys. And if you think it sucks, well, send me some hate mail, Batman versus James Bond at gmail.com. Let me know. Anywho, so 007 Sean Connery's obviously going to advance. Who's going to be going to the next round with him? It's going to be him versus Oddjob. Well, we have a whole nother Goldfinger setup here. So Sean Connery versus Oddjob. We know how that ended up, but boy, was that a good fight. Oddjob could, he might have the upper hand though, or the upper hat. See what I did there? Unless there's electricity or something like an electrical power cord, then I don't know if James Bond, Sean Connery is going to be able to beat Oddjob. I think that's going to be really close. That's just me. Let me know what you think. The next one's going to be Goldfinger versus Emil Largo, and the winner of that was actually going to be Largo because Largo is number 2 of Spectre, and I see him, and the next one, he's going to be battling out in the second round versus George Lazenby. This would have been a really good James Bond movie. Let me just say, if this would be Thunderball, if you would have taken George Lazenby's James Bond and put him in Thunderball, that could have been an even darker story. Some people will say Thunderball was overrated. I think it's probably the second James Bond, their best Sean Connery James Bond film, but we'll save that for another day. Bottom line, it's going to be George Lazenby's 007 versus Emil Largo. Let me know what you think about that. Moving on here, we have Roger Moore's 007 versus Jaws. So we've seen this fight a couple times, and we know how that ends up. But still, Jaws versus Roger Moore. Anytime Jaws ever did that chokehold on James Bond, not the chokehold, but he just grabs him by the neck and lifts him up about like 5 feet high, and Roger Moore is making that like sound, and it's just it's classic James Bond. So I know who I'm going to pick on that one, and I'm still going to save it for next week, but I'm just going to say that go back and watch The Spy Who Loved Me, go back and watch Moonraker, and you might have a good idea of who's going to win that fight. So next up, it is going to be Max Zorin versus Fran Sanchez. So, and happy belated birthday to Mr. Christopher Walken, who actually was not only a James Bond villain who played Max Zorin, but he was also in the Batman Returns movie when he was playing Max Schreck. Both incredibly great villains. Christopher Walken never gets enough credit, I don't think, but to be able to play a part in both franchises, we'll talk about that another time, about characters who've shared worlds between these two movies. What a great villain. So we have Max Zorin versus Fran Sanchez who was the villain in License to Kill. That's going to be an interesting one. Remember, Max Zorin was KGB. He is very psycho. Fran Sanchez, that is your typical drug lord, but he's he's clever. He's very smart at the same time. He's very violent. If he's taking a whip to his girlfriend and throwing guys, tying a CIA agent above the water and having a shark bite off his leg, just imagine what he could do to a KGB agent. Just saying, that's an interesting fight right there. So the next one's going to be Pierce Brosnan's 007 versus Daniel Craig's 007. Wow. Now this is one that man, it depends on what the Bond fan in you. Did you like Pierce Brosnan's interpretation better than Daniel Craig? If you know me by now, at least if you listen to these last 4 episodes, you know where I stand with that. But still got love for Pierce, and I have plenty of love for Daniel Craig. So Bond versus Bond here. You can say you take the GoldenEye James Bond, Pierce Brosnan versus whatever Daniel Craig. If you want to take him Casino Royale, where he's more inexperienced, that would be an interesting fight, because you have one who's already established as James Bond for quite a while, and then you have a up and coming James Bond who still is trying to figure everything out. So I'll let you think about that one. Moving on here is Mr. Hinks from Spectre, who was played by Dave Bautista. It was a villain, kind of more like a Jaws Odd Job throwback, versus Ernst Stavro Blofeld. Now, Hinks was working for Blofeld in Spectre, but remember, we have, what I decided to do with this was combine all the Ernst Stavro Blofelds in this. So, that's an interesting fight. You have a henchman versus number one, and, well, what's probably going to end up being, but I still figured I'd throw it in there anyway. So we will see what happens with that. So moving on here, like I said, let me know, going back. So let me know what you think about the brackets. Like I said, we'll go back next week with the final 2 rounds, and we'll see who the winners are. So moving on here, let's move into some scores. Okay, so, we've talked about movie scores and what it means to have a theme. Obviously, Batman themes are very iconic. We've had, I would say, 3 very iconic Batman themes. Batman. Yeah. Not my favorite Batman theme, but it's still a catchy one, if you will. The next one was like, dun, 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 dun. And the only reason I'm doing this is because I'm still trying to figure out how to do this versus, to play themes on here without getting copyright issues. If you know how to do that, then just, send me a message. That was supposed to be the Danny Elfman Batman theme. It was a poor attempt. I tried. And then you have, Hans Zimmer, dun, 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 dun. That whole more orchestral Batman theme that he did with James Newton Howard. So, and then you have the James Bond theme, which is really interesting about that, because we just talked about this earlier, is that you have many different James Bond actors But at the same time, they've decided to keep the James Bond theme the same, because that James Bond theme, since 1962, written by Monty Norman and performed by the John Barry Orchestra, has just been iconic. Everybody knows that theme. However, in the Batman franchise, when you have the reboots and requels, whatever the crap you want to call them, they change the theme to suit it for whatever that Batman is. So when I heard this news this week, and this is kind of flowing in the news, kind of mixed with scores, but I did want to make sure that we talk about it, it's that Hans Zimmer, and he's the one who, like I said, did the Batman score, or the whole Dark Knight trilogy, and partially with James Newton Howard for the Nolan trilogy. But he also did the Man of Steel theme, and he decided to come back for Batman v Superman. Now, he really didn't, he had a hand in doing the Batman theme, but the reason that, the only reason he would come back on, or the only way he came back on, was that he asked for some help. He asked his buddy, whose name is Junkie XL, and Junkie XL, pretty much, he's the guy who did the Mad Max score. He did Deadpool scores. He's been out there for quite a while. He's collaborated with Nolan and Zimmer on the Dark Knight trilogy score also, but he just more like remixes on the soundtrack. If you ever had a chance to listen to him, you'll hear those Joker remix, Batman theme remixes out there. They're pretty cool. But Hans Zimmer decided to announce this week that he is retiring from the superhero scores. Honestly, this was really sad news for me. It just kind of saddened me, and the reason is just because Hans Zimmer is right now the equivalent of what? No, I can't say that, because I'm comparing apples to oranges when I say he is the John Williams right now. He is like he is up there with he's probably one of my top favorite composers out there. I can't say how much I love the Dark Knight trilogy scores. I listen to them every single week. I can't get enough of them. The themes in there, the Joker theme, the Batman theme, the Bane theme that he created in there. What he did with Man of Steel score, what he did. The Batman v Superman score was interesting. I'd like to save that for another time because I'm kind of running short on time here. But the fact is, though, that he said that, he was talking to BBC, and he says that he's retiring from doing any more comic book movies. Quoted, "I did Batman Begins with Chris Nolan 12 years ago, so the Dark Knight trilogy might be 3 movies to you. To me, it was 11 years of my life. Then I did Man of Steel. Then I did this one being Batman v Superman. How am I supposed to say it? I have officially retired from the superhero business. This one was very hard for me to do and to try to find new language." Like I said, when I heard this was really sad news for me. But at the same time, it's just like, you know how long 12 years is? I mean, that's quite a long time to be working with superheroes. In between that, he also did other movies, like he did Inception, he did Interstellar, he did the Amazing Spider-Man 2 score, but we'll forget about that. But he created these themes, and we've talked about what a theme means in a movie. If you don't have a good score to accompany a movie, then sometimes it can ruin the movie. And I know that you James Bond fans will agree with me when you go and listen to like a score, say GoldenEye, Eric Serra, who did that score, and a lot of people will say that score was crap. It's an interesting score, and I always say we'll talk about it, and I really will talk about it because I'm going to be doing reviews. I've decided of all the movies, all the Batman movies I can get my hands on, and I already own all the James Bond movies. But going back with the theme, it's just what it means to have a theme for a character. Like I said, you hear that James Bond theme, and it's iconic. You know that when you're going to be in a James Bond movie, you'll hear at least that one. You'll hear that at least one time. It's just like it's time to kick some ass kind of time. It's like, all right, it's throwing some action, it's throwing some gadgets, it's throwing some girls, it's throwing some martinis. With Batman, it's like, okay, well, let's put on the cowl, let's put on the cape, and let's, go kick some bad guys' asses at the same time. So, for Hans Zimmer to say this, it's like, okay, well, same could be said about John Barry. Okay. John Barry did the scores for quite a long time. Now, he did come back and he did leave, and came back again. Do I think Nolan? Do I think that Hans Zimmer's going to come back? No. I think the man's tired. I think that, I respect him so much for saying this, and not just because I'm a Hans Zimmer fan. It's just because he knows when to throw in the towel. He's like, you know what? I have nothing new to offer to this. It's going to end up. I'm worried it's going to end up sounding the same. So I'm going to kind of just leave it on a high note and just say, I'm finished with this. But thank you for all. Thank you all for accepting me as the composer. I'm going to move on and do something else. So, and the same can be said about any artist. Like we said, even with John Barry, you go back and listen to his Bond themes. And when I say Bond themes, I'm talking about the themes specific for the movie of, say, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, Moonraker, The Living Daylights, which was his last one, A View to a Kill. All of those had iconic, they still had the James Bond theme in there, but they all had their own secondary theme of the movie. Majority of the time, it was they had, how you had the Bond theme song at the very beginning, the opening credits, and say you have, let's just say Goldfinger, dun, 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 and that goes throughout that secondary theme, of the horns just goes throughout the whole movie, and it just sets the tone of the movie. With a Batman film, it's a little different because, like I said, we've had so many different Batman themes and so many. It sounds like what the studio wants to do is separate their Batman films. This was Tim Burton's. This was Joel Schumacher's. This is Zack Snyder's, Batman. So, and like I said, I respect him for this, and I just want to go on with that. It's just saying, okay, well, being a composer, having two different movie franchises is, got to be very difficult because you want to separate them because it's a different actor playing it. Sure, John Barry could have, created just said, hey, I don't want to use the James Bond theme anymore. I'm going to leave that just for Sean Connery. What did he do, though? He put a different spin on it for Roger Moore. He used, instead of using so much like the guitars and so forth, it sounded like he used more of an orchestra in there. He used more horns instead of, say, the guitar. When it came to The Living Daylights, like with Timothy Dalton, he used more like an upbeat electronic kind of theme. He still had it more like the Roger Moore, but that's another story for another day. But I at least wanted to bring that up that, hey, Hans Zimmer, this one's to you, buddy. Composers, I still say, are one of the most important elements of a movie. If you don't have that theme in there, it's very important to have like a theme, to establish a theme for your hero, whether it be James Bond or Batman, because when we hear that, it just gets us excited. It's just, I don't know, something that puts a smile on our face. It just, puts a grin on our face, if you will. So that about wraps it up for this episode of the Batman versus James Bond show. Please subscribe on iTunes and or Spreaker. Please make sure you rate this show and leave a comment. Let me know, leave a little 5-star review on there and let me know how I'm doing. I really much appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Batman vs. Bond, and be sure to like the Batman vs. James Bond Facebook page. Like James Bond, I will return. Once again, thank you all for listening, and until next time, peace out.